In the last scene of the Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise's love has been killed. The bad guy has escaped onto the roof of the train. Will Tom follow? Of course. Trumpets, the updated theme music from the television series. Cruise takes off his tie and jacket in his white shirt. He is ready for the business. The wind lifts his body and throws it around. He know that wouldn't deter him, but we know the job wouldn't be easy. The bad guy in black has an accomplice following him in a helicopter. They come to bridge, camera follows as accomplice and the chopper fly under it. They come to a tunnel, accomplice and chopper do the incredible and plunge into it. Bad guy jumps onto the chopper leg and Cruise onto the other. How will they get off? Cruise blasts the others with a bubble gum. Bad guy and accomplice die, but our hero is thrown on the top of the moving train. Will he hang on? Of course, but the chopper lands so close as to be practically on top of him and it bleeds as whirring. Will it decapitate him? Of course not. He is not Tom Cruise. The scene is impossibly silly, but also funny and exciting. Mission Impossible forsakes the uncomfortable. Do you see what you believe? To trick us into agreeing with the more delightful. Do you believe what you see? The word that recurs most often in the notes I took while watching the Mission Impossible is fab. But I wouldn't argue that it's a great film. I would like to argue that it's rather good, even this is difficult. As yet, we have no vocabulary adequately to describe or evaluate such films, which are now the dominant mode of the Hollywood filmmaking, so we tend to dismiss them as a popcorn. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to take the popcorn movie seriously. Part of the difficulty of appreciating such film is that its story is so simple and so ludicrous. A mole is stealing a list of US secret operatives in Europe. Ethan Hunt and colleagues are sent on a mission to discover seller and buyer, apprehend them, and retrieve the misket. During the mission, Hunt's colleagues are killed. He is taken to be the mole and spends the rest of the film trying to find the real guilty party and to clear his own name while evading capture by his former employers. If one were to speak of this film in terms of the character or issues, one would come up pretty empty handed. Mission Impossible is a glamorous, exciting, sexy, and sometimes witty. I love the way it looks, and gadgets and the clothes. The film also contains indelible moments. Emilio Estevez impaled Kristen Scott Thomas red lipstick against the nourish blue background by the Charles Bridge in Prague, and a hand in a black leather glove preventing a bead of the sweat from hitting a wristen white floor in slow motion. The geometric design that the framing of the rushing water forms as it chases after a cruise. But the film is gleefully superficial. It doesn't fit easily into any traditional discourse of aesthetics. It seems to lack coherence, balance, and internal consistency, and more important, depth. Mission Impossible belongs into a long history of the cinema of attraction. Paramount Pictures had repeatedly tried and failed to adapt the Mission Impossible television series to the big screen. Tom Cruise loved the show as a kid and began working on his vision for it. He believed so strongly in the project that he made it the first film developed under the banner of his fledgling production company. The two came together and in 1996 This unique interpretation hit theaters. The first signal that Mission Impossible aimed to be different came with the signing of the director, Brian De Palma. Though not unfamiliar with the studio blockbusters, De Palma came to the film with his own peculiar sensibilities. You see it on the technical side with his extreme close ups and fascinating camera perspective, but also through his deconstruction of the popular long running TV series and its characters. That's what prompted the biggest response from the fans of the show. Obviously, Mission Impossible launched the crew's upstanding Ethan Hunt character, less sexualized than the James Bond, but with the same unflinching moral code. The film begins with Ethan as a fourth man for a covert IMF mission in Prague. A very good John Voight takes for the Peter Graves as a John Phelps, the team leader who sends his team to nab a top secret list of undercover IMF agents from the US Embassy before it falls into the wrong. Things go terribly wrong. A mole is unearthed and Ethan finds himself in the crosshairs of the IMF director Kittredge, who brands him public enemy number one. He seeks out of the help of the show dissolved agent Luther Stickle and Franz Krieger to root out the mole and clear his name. The wonderful Vanessa Redgrave plays a crafty arms dealer. Emmanuel Beard plays a mysterious IMF agent, and even Emilio Estevez pops up as a not so super hacker. It was interesting to rewatch the Mission Impossible in the light of how we routinely see these types of the movies today. It's a blockbuster uninterested in franchise blueprints, shared universes, or other big budget considerations. Those things weren't as prevalent at the time, which allowed for De Palma to play with his Hitchcockian and genre thriller influences. I still remember the initial reactions from the people I knew who didn't quite know what to make of it. The big finale aside, Mission Impossible subverted the blockbuster at nearly every turn. Now keep in mind it was 1996. It shared a big chunk of the summer box office with Independence Day, a movie all about fast paced action and a large scale destruction. Mission Impossible had a much different idea. Build quiet and focus sequences where a simple beat of the sweet can make white knuckle tension. Of course, the famous train sequence showed De Palma could also go big, and the scene was annoying prophecy of what the franchise would become famous for. Over time, I have grown to appreciate this movie more and more. Of course, the irony of it all is that this weekend's sixth installment is the Mission Impossible series hit theaters a subversive first film that went out of its way to break this blockbuster mold, birth a multi-billion-dollar franchise. But just like the original, the series has consistently differentiated itself from the most other big properties, and it has only gotten the better. Much of that is due to a prospective Tom Cruise, and he certainly got the thing started on the right foot. After nearly 30 years and increasingly larger adventures, Tom Cruise's time as Ethan Hunt has come full circle, bringing me to want to revisit his debut with the original Mission Impossible. While it's always been one I considered underrated when compared to the much better squeals, there's always been something I could never quite put my finger on about why it didn't quite land in the upper echelons of the franchise. Now, with this latest watch, I have finally realized why the film is still an effective franchise starter, even in spite of the few key problems. Developed by the David Coeb and Oscar winner Steven Zillian, 1996 Mission Impossible served as a continuation of both the 1960s and 80s spy TV shows, shifting the focus to a new Mission Impossible 4 team led by the veteran Jim Phelps, previously played by the Peter Graves, as they attempt to prevent CIA list of the undercover operatives around the world from making it onto the black market. However, when the team is killed and the list is stolen, Crew's Ethan Hunt is the last apparent survivor and framed for the failed mission, putting him on the run as he tries to determine the truth. Mission Impossible's plot is really quite messy. Given how complex the franchise often strives to be keep audiences guessing, it's understandable the Mission Impossible writers would come up with twisty plots. But Quabe Zillion and script co-writer Robert Town went a little too far with his first outing. The initial setup of the plot is still enough, with the IMF team being tasked to prevent the leaking of the undercover operatives, being a standard spy operation. However, once Ethan goes on the lam and starts turning to everyone from the smooth talking arms dealers Max to dissolved IMF agents, things become murky. Even worse is, as Ethan's plan evolve and reveal newer layers, the film becomes all the messier and more implausible. One of the movie's biggest areas of the frustration is the nature of IMF's mole hunt, which makes the Ethan their target for much of the film's runtime. In what would become a running trend for the Mission Impossible franchise, it too often feels like the plot is being purposely manipulated to add an extra layer of the cat and the mouse to do proceedings, which also frequently makes for some very convenient run-ins with the Henry Crisney cartridge. Even worse is as Ethan plans evolve and reveal newer layers, the film becomes all the messier and more implausible. Granted, a high-tech spy franchise like Mission Impossible does need to be viewed with a varying suspensions of the disbelief, but the first film finds itself crumbling all the more when thought about too closely. Dean Reno's Kager is often shady character, but his loyalty is made all the more questionable when wondering why he had the knife out during the Ionic CIA Black Vault heist, while Philip's billionaire's turn is so obvious when just looking at the preposterous nature of faking his own death. Brian De Palma's direction is thoroughly tense. While eight total movies, plenty of the directors have brought their own unique stamps to the franchise, and De Palma certainly delivered some great imagery in Mission Impossible for the future filmmakers to pull from. Even as the stakes in the film continue to rise and set the pieces become bigger, the Oscar winner never forgets to keep the characters in the forefront of the camera to make the film feel intimate and grounded. The face to face conversations between the characters are particularly some of the most stylish, with the use of the close ups and ditch angles amplifying the tension and paranoia on the scene. Even still, I can't deny the De Palma in directing one of the biggest scale films of his career did a remarkable job making the film's set pieces feel appropriately large and explosive. The aforementioned Black Vault heist remains one of the most iconic Mission Impossible set pieces for the good reason, as De Palma and cinematographer Stephen H. Brewman's visual palette keeps us incredibly immersed as every potential hitch in Ethan's plan happens and yet he still pulls it off. There is a reason Ethan Hunt remains one of the Creole's best characters. Creose has a lot of iconic movies in his filmography, though the actual memorability of his character in other films is mixed bag. The original Mission Impossible alone makes it all the more clear why Ethan Hunt is one of the Oscars nominees' best characters. Initially introduced as a dangerously serious figure, The film quickly proceeds to showcase a nicely broad range of the emotions in Ethan, including a deceptively witty side as well as a tragic undercurrent to him that later films would expound upon. And while the rest of the Mission Impossible roster turn it solid performances, the actual casting choices are a bit more little mixed selection. I absolutely love Jean Reno in a pretty much everything I have seen him in. But from the first moment we see him, I have no reason to believe he will work in conjunction with Ethan. Emmanuel Beer feels like nothing more than the collierly named honeypot in a role as a Clary rather than offering anything meaningful to both the opening and closing teams, while Wing Rhames Luther is breezily trusted by Ethan too quickly, he at least infuses more charisma into the character to make me want to like him. It's been nearly 3 decades since Tom Cruise Ethan Hunt broke into the CIA in Mission Impossible and set the ball rolling on what was to become the biggest action movie franchise in Hollywood history. That ionic heist, which is the best scene in the first Mission Impossible movie, might still be the best set piece in the entire franchise. Mission Impossible Jim Phillips' villain twist is also among the best in the franchise, which has almost consistently always featured fantastic villains. However, it still catches you off guard unless you are aware of the twist, and it also sets up the perfect homage to the original Mission Impossible TV show with a mask stunt towards the end of the movie. 1990s Mission Impossible movie doesn't just hold up today but also shows how it perfected the blueprint for spy cinema, which was then gradually modified for the later installments to create the action heavy blockbuster franchise it became. Rewatching the film is still an amazing viewing experience as you are revisiting the roots, but quite a few elements are rather surprising today. Mission Impossible's title montage is very 90s. The opening credits sequences in the Mission Impossible movies are epic montage of the scene from the film sets to the iconic Mission Impossible theme song. Each film has its own version of the theme, which suits its tone, but all of the renditions, Danny Elfman's version is the closest of the Lalo Schifrin original score, and the corresponding montage suits it. With inverse colors, quick cuts, frenzied rooms, and alternating glimpses of the movie's title, the opening montage in the Mission Impossible is distinctly 90s, which looks completely different from the franchise's later aesthetic. It was made the peak of the spy movies in the 90s, and the shots in the montages are chosen to create suspense more than the thriller or excitement. The tone is very different compared to the rest of the franchise. Brian De Palma direction gives Mission Impossible the vibe of an espionage thriller instead of an action blockbuster, which would more appropriately describes every squeal. Tension with a tickling clock is a gimmick in every movie. But the first film treatment of the suspense as a narrative device would never truly return to the franchise, even as the stakes grew bigger. Mission Impossible is one of the best spy movies of the 1990s and still largely holds up in the terms of creating and holding dramatic tension through the plot twist and deliberately placed sequences that are held together by the De Palma's masterful direction. Despite the spectacle presented on screen, the film has grounded tone that you wouldn't find in the other films. Ethan Hunt teams being killed off is genuinely shocking if you don't know it's coming. One of the best aspects of the Mission Impossible as a blockbuster franchise is its treatment of death. While franchises like Fast And Furious get regularly joked about for constantly bringing back the Dutch characters. The Mission Impossible franchise doesn't do illogical revivals. While this means some Mission Impossible characters deserve more screen time than they could, it makes their death impactful. However, there is a certain polish to the death scenes in the newer films, which adds to the sense of the occasion but without getting gory. The first movie, however, is extremely violent, and beyond the gruesome nature of the deaths, you also don't expect to start the movie with Ethan's teammates dying. It's perfectly executed premise to create the narrative tension. The Langley break-in still holds up nearly 30 years later. You would be exhausted for thinking older set pieces in the franchise, built on the premise of outdoing the previous entry, wouldn't be compelling. But that's what makes De Palma Mission Impossible a classic. Despite nearly 3 decades between it and the wing walking stunt in the film, the Langley break-in still holds its own among the best set piece in the franchise. The part of the wire stunt from Mission Impossible which Tom Cruise improvised demonstrates how appropriate the actor was as a casting choice for Ethan. Not only does he perform his stunt, which has become significantly more outrageous in recent years, but he also constantly emotes while in three physically demanding situations. His performance makes the scene even more tense. Tom Cruise performs sleight of the hand magic tricks in the Mission Impossible. While we all know that Tom Cruise physical proves because of his unbelievable stunt work over the years. From climbing the Burj Khalifa to hanging off a helicopter, his commitment is not using post productive tricks to the thrill audience goes beyond just risking his life to create a realistic looking action set pieces. Mission Impossible features the most surprising intense of the practice. The sleight of the hand magic in Mission Impossible, which Ethan Hunt uses to switch discs and keep the enemies one step behind, is actually done by the actor who learned how to do close up magic just for the movie. The last two films in the franchise refer back to the Hunt's neck for sleight of hand magic. But this is still the most impressive trick. That's David Schneider driving the train in Mission Impossible's finale. Jeremy Renner was wasted by the Mission Impossible franchise, and his character is practically reduced to just having a cameo in a Mission Impossible Nation. But some other genuine cameos in the franchise are quite effective, especially Anil Kapoor's cameo in the Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol as the Indian telecommunication entrepreneur who added the humor to the movie's climax. Now, while the later movies in Mission Impossible have more intentional comedy, the first film is much drier in its humor, and it's shocking to realize that the train driver who watches the Ethan jumping off an exploding helicopter is actually British comedian David Schneider. His expressions of utter shock are impeccable. And the blink and you miss cameo is a great Easter egg. The scene where the Ethan realizes Clary survived is uncomfortable. From the first scene, where we see Clary right after the integration, it's clear that Emilio's beard is being framed as eye candy even when she's unconscious. The camera angles are in keeping with De Palma's reputation as a director of sleazy thrillers, but it becomes much more uncomfortable later, especially when Ethan meets Clary after his whole team dies. Ethan is supposed to be searching for Clary in the scene, but the actors' chemistry, the sensual, creative choices made in framing the beard, add a very uncomfortable tone. The expressions on the beard's face and the way her body flails might make you wonder if he's assaulting her instead of just searching her. The music in the background doesn't help. The massive, unspoken age difference between the gym. One of the harsh realities of rewatching The Mission Impossible is realizing that it's often too steeped in the trends of the 1990s that are rightfully less prevalent in the industry. And its movies today, female characters in the Mission Impossible franchise have more agency in the later movies, and none of the actresses are reduced to eye candy like Emmanuelle Beard. Moreover, her character Clary is married to John Voight character Jim. The actors have an age gap of 25 years, which adds an uncomfortable element in the film. However, the standards haven't improved, as it ironically started a trend in the Mission Impossible movies. The age gap between the crews and his female co-leads have grown with every entry in the franchise. In 1996, Mission Impossible has a thrilling conclusion as Ethan Hunt exposes the IMF's role and clears his name and sets up a major franchise. Tom Cruise headlines the spy thriller as IMF agent Ethan Hunt, whose life is turned upside down when his entire team seemingly dies during a mission disguised as a mole hunt. This forces Ethan to go on the run from the IMF and Aegean Cartridge, Henry Cizerni, and assemble a team of the disavowed agents so they can steal the NOC list from the CIA so he can sell it to the Max, Vanessa Redgrave, and expose the mole's real identity. The endings of the 1996 Mission Impossible methodically wraps up the central story through a final set entirely on a train by wearing a mask to disguise himself as a Jim Phelps. Ethan confirms that Clary was working with her husband to betray the IMF and frame him. Ethan gets the upper hand on them both by sharing footage with Kittredge that confirms that Jim isn't dead. That leads to the climactic fight atop the train, with Jim and Franz Krieger dying in the attempted escape. The Ethan saves the day for the first time of many. How Ethan figured out Jim Phillips was the IMF's mole. The identity of the IMF's mole is the big mystery at the heart of the mission. Impossible and its ending. While Ethan has been framed as the mole, the movie focuses on the two potential suspects, Jim and Kittredge. Since Jim is believed to be dead by everyone involved and is missing from the majority of the runtime, Kittredge is set up as the most likely answer. He is hunting down the NOC list and was overseeing the mole hunt mission in the Prague at the beginning. However, it's ultimately confirmed that Jim is IMF's mole and planned to sell the NOC list to the Max. This becomes clear to audiences while the two are having dinner after Jim reveals himself to be alive. But Ethan started to piece it all together earlier on. His first clue came when he saw the Krieger knife during the Langley breaks in. The same style of the knife killed Sarah Davis during the initial mission, while many other people could have a knife similar to the Krieger's. It raised a red flag for Ethan. His suspicions were then heightened after he discovered the Bible in the hotel came from the Dark Hotel in Chicago. Jim stayed at the Drake Hotel right before the Prague mission and brought the Bible back with him. That's revealing because communications with the Max relied on using passages such as Job 3:40. The only reason Jim would bring the Bible back with him would be to ensure he had accurate verses to use while speaking with Max. Once Jim revealed himself to be alive, Ethan knew that he must be the IMF's role, even as Jim suggested Kittredge. Why Jim turned on the IMF? Jim's villain reveals in Mission Impossible's ending is a major twist, which could leave the questions about why he did it. He not so subtly reveals his motivations during his dinner with Ethan, while he tries to pin it all on the Kittredge still. Jim cites the end of the Cold War and a president of the United States who runs the country without working closely with the intelligence community as the reason why someone would turn on IMF. He goes on to the reference begin an absolute piece of hardware not worth updating having a lousy marriage and making $62 k per year as additional motivating factor. Jim's plan would also have eliminated the person he might think his wife could leave him for. Jim may be acting like these are reasons why Kittredge would turn bad, but it's clear that he is speaking about himself here. Jim is an older field agent who sees his career coming to an end. He is clearly unsatisfied with his work and his pay, and he wants a fresh start. He wouldn't made millions selling the NOC list to Max, allowing him and Clary to start a new life together. And considering there are also teases of the Clary having feelings for Ethan, Jim's plan would also have eliminated the person he might think his wife could leave him for. Why Jim killed Clary? One of the unexpected moments in the Mission Impossible ending is Clary's death. This is primarily due to her dying at the hand of the Jim. Clary was complicit in the Jim's plan in the Prague and was meant to leave the train with him. Her death was not entirely planned, but it was a calculated move on Jim's part. Jim killed the Clary as a way to distract Ethan. Ethan had just revealed that Jim was allied to the IMF, making it clear that he was the real mole. Jim decided to shoot Clary, knowing that this will buy him some time to try and escape as Ethan goes to save her. The Clary, Jim, and Ethan love triangle also comes into play with the decision. Clary tells the Jim not to shoot Ethan, and that clearly upsets him. It would seem he understands in this moment that Clary does have some feelings for him. She would been against having Ethan die from the beginning, and Jim had enough for her standing up for him. As a result, Clary has one of the Mission Impossible most tragic deaths. What happened to the NOC list? The NOC list, or the non official cover list, is the MacGuffin at the heart of the Mission Impossible story. It contains the identities of every American covert field agent. So, exposing the truth about them would be a national crisis that could lead to the deaths of the hundreds or thousands of individuals. The ending has Ethan give a Max the NOC list, while Luther James the signal so she cannot distribute it. In the very end, Kittredge and his IMF team approach Max and take the NOC list back. The copy of this list would likely be destroyed then. Kittredge and Max begin a secret partnership. Max's attempt to get the NOC list should have led to her facing criminal charges after Kittredge and his team bust her. However, Mission Impossible endings take things in a different direction. Kittredge and Max strike a deal to begin a secret partnership instead of Max bringing her lawyers into the equation and Kittredge arresting her. This is a way for the IMF to develop its connections worldwide and align itself with a powerful international arms dealer. The fruits of this partnership are not built upon immediately for the franchise. It's not until the introduction of the Max daughter, Alana Mitsopoulos, in Mission Impossible Fallout that the series confirms the partnership between the Max and IMF continued for the decades and was passed down for the Alana to manage. Why Kittredge got Ethan's mom arrested and what happened to her? A minor but important development in the Mission Impossible's third act is the reveal that Ethan's mom and her brother are arrested. They are framed by the Kittredge as being part of an international drug scheme. This was Kittredge's way of applying some pressure on Ethan and indicating that the IMF can still hurt him through the people he loves, even if he could manage to stay out of their grasp. Luckily, Mission Impossible ending confirms that Ethan's mom and her brother are set free later on. This allows them to return to their normal lives, confused about how they could be mistaken for being involved in such a crime. How Mission Impossible 1990s ending sets up the franchise future. While the massive franchise that followed 1996 Mission Impossible was not guaranteed upon its release, the movie did leave room for more adventures to come. This directly comes with Ethan's conclusion. He indicates to Luther that he is not going back to the IMF after this mess. However, his mind seemingly changes when he is approached on a plane about a mission in Aruba. The movie ends before we see Ethan watch the mission briefing, but it's clear he's not done being an IMF agent. That enables more Mission Impossible movies to be made. The other big detail for the Mission Impossible future comes with Luther being reinstated at the IMF. He has been removed from the dissolved list and plans to return to working in the espionage field legitimately. Let's make a key moment considering Luther returns in every future Mission Impossible movie. It's also worth mentioning that Mission Impossible sets up Mission Impossible the finale reckoning. Even if that was not planned at the time, this comes through William Donnelly being transported to a man a radar tower in Alaska after the Langley breaks in. That seemingly minor detail comes back in the finale reckoning with the Donnelly's return, even if Mission Impossible 1996 didn't make the character and its location would be important going forward. Mission Impossible is a 1996 American action film directed by Brian De Palma and starring Tom Cruise. Work on the script had begun early with the filmmaker Sidney Pollack on board before De Palma, Steven Zillian, David Coip, and the Robert Towner brought in the Mission Impossible went into the pre-production without a shooting script. De Palma came up with some action sequences, but Coip and Town were dissatisfied with the story that leads up to these events. Ethan Hunt is a part of the small team of the Impossible Mission Force (IMF), an unofficial branch of the Central Intelligence Agency led by the Jim Phillips. The team assembles formation in Prague to prevent the Alexander Golitsyn, an American diplomat, from stealing the unofficial cover list. A comprehensive list of all the covert agents in Eastern Europe from the US Embassy. The mission goes hopelessly wrong, apparently resulting in the deaths of the entire team, except for Ethan. Technician Jack Harmon is impaled in an elevator shaft. Jim is shot on the bridge by an unknown assailant, Hannah Williams, and Jim's wife Clary are both killed by a car bomb, and both Sarah Davis and Gulitson are stabbed to the death by an unknown assailant. The NOC list is stolen. After fleeing the scene, Ethan meets with IMF director Eugen Kittredge at a restaurant where they discuss the events of the night. Eventually, Ethan realizes that a second IMF team was watching his team during the failed operation. Kittredge then discloses that the operation was a setup meant to draw out a mole in the IMF. The mole has made a deal to sell the list to an arms dealer known as a Mex as a part of an operation called Job 314. As a result, the NC list taken in the mission was a fake, and the computer disk it is rigged with a tackling device. After Kittredge informs Ethan of his suspicions that Ethan is the mole, and Ethan blows up the floor to ceiling aquarium with a stick of explosive chewing gums in the restaurant and flees. Ethan returns to the IMF safe house where, realizing the job 314 refers to a Bible verse in the book of the Job, and presumably the mole's conte as well. Ethan begins email correspondence with Max over a biblical correspondence website and warns the Max about the fake NOC list. Ethan then encounters the Clary and discovers that she has survived the mission, having gotten out of the car in which she was waiting before it exploded. Max arranges a meeting with Ethan where he offers to deliver the real NOC list in exchange for $10 million and a face to face meeting with the real job. Max agrees, and she and Ethan then escape moments before a CIA team, alerted by the tracking device, arrives in search of the fake NOC list. Ethan assembles a team of dissolved agents, computer expert Luther Stickle, and obsessive pilot Franz Krieger, who claims it is a bank heist. Ethan, Luther, Krieger, and Clary infiltrate the CIA headquarters and successfully steal the full NOC list before escaping to a safe house in London. While in London, Ethan discovers that his uncle and mother have been falsely arrested by the drug trafficking in an attempt by the Kittredge to lure him out of the hiding. This infuriates the Ethan and he contacts the Kittredge who offers to drop the charges if Ethan surrenders. Ethan stays on the line long enough for Kittredge to trace him and then hangs up, only to find Jim wounded but alive standing next to him. Jim presumed dead in the Prague operation, and following Ethan ever since, tells Ethan that Kittredge is in the mole and is trying to tie up loose ends. As Ethan listens, he mentally pieces together the operation and realizes that Jim, having become disillusioned with his work and his actually job, and that Krieger, who uses the same distinctive make of the knife that was used to kill Sarah and Gullerson and steal the NOC list, has assisted him. However, Ethan is still doubtful about the Clary's place in the conspiracy. The next day, Max and Ethan arrange to meet aboard the TGV en route to Paris, with Clary and Luther abroad to provide backup. Kittredge is also abroad, having received tickets and a watch from the Ethan. Aboard the train, Ethan delivers the NOC list to Max, who directs him to the baggage car to find his money and job. Clary arrives in the baggage car to meet with her husband, revealing her complicity as she suggests that they leave with the money and let Ethan take the blame. Jim suddenly peels his face away, revealing himself to be Ethan in disguise. They are interrupted by the arrival of the real Jim Phelps, unhinged, armed, and demanding that Ethan hand over the money. Ethan does so, but then slowly puts on a pair of glasses from the original operation in Prague, with a camera built in to the bridge. The image of the Jim alive is transmitted to the watch Ethan sent to the Kittredge, exposing Job's true identity. Clary tries to intervene, but the Jim kills her and climbs up to the root of the train, while Krieger, also revealed as a traitor, approaches in a helicopter to extract him. Ethan follows him onto the roof, impeding him and tethering Krieger's helicopter to the train, dragging it into the Channel Tunnel. In the tunnel, Jim leaps to the helicopter. Ethan follows, climbing the helicopter's landing skids and attaching another piece of the explosive chewing gum, the final relic of the Prague, to the unshield. He leaps back to the train just as the ensuing explosion kills the Krieger and Jim is crushed in between the copter remains and the tracks. Now, with the custody of the NOC list, Max, and Job's true identity, Kittredge reinstates Luther and Ethan as the IMF agent. He also drops his investigations against Ethan, who resigns from the IMF. As he files home, a flight attendant approaches him and asks, through a coded phrase, if he is ready to take on new. Since Tom Cruise first played IMF agent Ethan Hunt in 1996, these adrenaline pumping spy thrillers have collectively generated billions at the global box office while continuously reinventing themselves for the new generations for moviegoers. However, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning was officially released on 17 May 2025 in India, while the date fixed for the United States in 23 May. It is the eighth and the final installment of the Ethan Hunt saga, intended as a conclusion to the story arc that has been developing over the past films. I think that's why the word final makes the sense in the title of the 2025 installment. However, there is no official confirmation of what we will get next from the Mission Impossible franchise after this final installment of the series. In this article, I'll jot up how massive the franchise has become financially, racking each film by its worldwide earning and sharing other insights about its box office performance. Whether you are a die-hard fan who has seen Impossible Mission or simply curious about Hollywood's most successful action franchises, this is worthy scrolling. Mission Impossible movies ranked by the box office collection. Before diving into the details, a Mission Impossible film has performed globally. I've arranged them from the highest to the lowest worldwide gross to give you immediate sense of the franchise financial evolution. Enemies of the West. The film also offers a pretty dystopic view of contemporary Western culture. There is no longer any difference between the East and the West. What happens in Kiev and Prague or Washington and London is similar. All are corrupt places with the citizen under continuous surveillance. Government, which is supposed to protect, throws out morality, ethics, justice, and law to get what it wants, going as far as attempting to kill an honest curious who is simply and desperately trying to do the right thing. Family is far away, ineffectual, vulnerable. Friends are unreliable. They have killed your other friends and may yet kill you. Love, as personified by Emmanuel Beard, is a source of longing, an object of desire, and an instrument of betrayal. The worst enemies of the Western culture are the third world and terrorists. The worst thing that can happen to an individual is to be disavowed, to be cut off from one's corporate community. To survive, the hero must remain monodic. It's a bleak view. The film's utopia is a masculinist fantasy, and that if one is Tom Cruise, all such problems will eventually be resolved. This is a reading This is a reading of the film that appears to give it a degree of depth. But to look at Mission Impossible only in this way is perhaps to miss what is most interesting about it. It builds around set pieces, each involving some element of action and ingenuity. The scenes were woven through the film like songs and dances are in an old fashioned musical. It isn't so much that they don't tell us anything about the characters, but that their function as spectacle exceeds their functions as narrative. For example, though we may need to know that Crew's colleagues are killed at the start, we don't need to see it in such details or do such effort to follow the story. Mission Impossible is a star vehicle structured around a protagonist. But it is not important to know much about the Ethan Hunt, the character Cruise plays. What's important is how Cruise star looks, smiles, jumps, leaps, outwits. In such movies, the star functions less as a character than as an integral productive value. Tom Cruise as the Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible is its own kind of spectacle. What's more, it's an integral part of the spectacle presented through the more elaborate action scenes, as when the wind buffets his body on the top of the train in the final scene. Like the musical using the order of the musical numbers to create the changes of the pace and variation, Mission Impossible tries to vary its own set piece. In the terms of the length, tone, and desired effect, the scene at the hotel is medium length and meant to be exciting. The scene is lengthy where Creo steals the diskette is long and meant to be funny and suspenseful. The scene where the crews make the diskette disappears in order to con Krieger is meant to be ingenious. The last action scene, the Lollapalooza, is to function as a showstopper. It begins with a blast from the Lalo Schifrin energetic television theme tune and repraises all the previous effects. It has excitement, speed, suspense, humor, ingenuity, but faster with more intensity and a higher pitch. Unlike the musical, much of the beauty and the meaning in the Mission Impossible comes from the impressive use of the non representational signs, color, music, movement. The scene at the Langley where Cruise and company download the names of the undercover agents into the diskette is a good example of the players on offer. While Rhames hacks away at the security with his computer, Beard, Cruz, and Reno disguise themselves as a fireman to get into the building. Beard injects the coffee of the computer worker with a serum to force him to go to the bathroom and plants a bug on his jacket so that his movements can be traced. In the meantime, Cruz and Reno have managed to get into the room via an air vent. So far, so familiar. This is reminiscent of the players of the James Bond with a gadget weight and a few punches thrown. As the scene proceeds, maintaining the humorous tone as shift registers. Will the computer operator return too soon, intercepting the crew stealing the diskette? Crews is hung from the ceiling with the wires handled by the Reno. We see a rat wandering next to Reno. Will this cause him to lose control? Will the sneeze he's been controlling simply erupt, stuffing off the alarm? De Palma is a brilliant student of Hitchcock. These bits are finite, suspenseful. And Reno does lose control. Cruise, previously floating downwards, now drops abruptly to only inches from the floor. He is hung from the wires, waving his arms as a balance to avoid touching the floor. He is hung. Thus, the film offers us the player of the Creole's physique, his physical prowess. But his body is also reduced to a graphic element of the composition, albeit a gorgeous one. For example, in the high angle shot, which shows us a cruise against a white floor crossed with thin black lines, his body seems two dimensional, it seems to disappear into a pattern as if matter had dissolved into geometry. Two separate moments make the scene thrilling, a drop of sweat about to hit the floor, and Reno's knife falling to the floor. Both are exciting only because of their context. If either lands, this could ruin the mission. They involve quick cuts to enhance the sense of danger and to give an impression of movement, but they also involve the use of slow motion to arrest and break movement. Thrilling fascination. The combined effect is that of the sibling. The slow motion fixes our gaze with awe. The quick cuts rush us headlong into the terror. It's thrilling to watch, but it's also fascinating because such as techniques so typical of the contemporary action film reduces the difference into the equivalence while divorcing an object from its properties. Here, a drop of sweat and a knife are equally dangerous. One, a natural process which does the body good, and the other produced by the human ingenuity and the human labor to cut and harm. Moreover, the knife is dangerous not because it can pierce, but it can fall. We would interpret this by arguing that in the post-modern world, culture is more source of the terrorized amazement than nature. Expect its awesomeness derives not from the god but from humans. But if we think of this at all, we think of it afterwards. Mission Impossible is so thrilling that even the hermeneutics are left behind for a while. On the right, the viewer is too busy rushing through its aesthetics to think of anything but its erotics. Mission Impossible is a delight because in placing the eye, kicking the vice versa, it continually asks the audience to wonder, how did they do that? And that the film does. And how it does is at least as important as why or what it all may mean. And now I begin the home stretch of my Mission Impossible review series with the debut of the Tom Cruise movie series. Mission Impossible 1996 was directed by the Brian De Palma from a story by a David Coeb and Steven Zillian and a screenplay by the Coeb and Robert Downey. We open in the middle of the caper in a progress in Kiev with a Jack Harmon watching a screen on which an older mustachioed man is grilling another man in Russian. The man thinks he's killed the woman lying on the bed, and the older man is demanding the name of his contact in exchange for helping him out of the mess. The scene is scored by the Danny Elfman with a few hints of the melody of the plot peeking out here and there. Harmon is concerned that the woman has been under too long. The Russian finally gives a name, whereupon a maid gives him a drink with knockout drops. The older man rips off his face to reveal an astonishingly young Tom Cruise, who orders that the man to be disposed of while his team begins striking the set of the hotel room. He injects the woman, and there's clearly a thing between them as he strokes her face once she revives. We got him, he confirms. And we cut to a match had been struck and a title sequence that flashier version of the original with a very brief split second clips from the movie ahead and occasional shots of an actual fuse burning rather than animated one from the TV titles. Like the 88 Revival's title, it includes a few shots of gadgetry, passport photos, and the likes as well as action clips. Elfman gives us a few really rich, gorgeous arrangements of Schifrin theme. Only Cruz gets his name given over the title sequence. The rest of the credits are shown over the next scene in a jet, where a flight attendant offered him a tea on tape John Voight, whom she addresses as a Mr. Phelps. For the moment, let's stipulate that this individual is Jim Phelps, though we'll explore this idea more later on. The tape scene that follows is in a familiar pattern, except it's a Bob Johnson giving the narration. The mission is to intercept the Goliathson, a traitor who's stolen half of the list of the US agents, non official covers, the NSA list, and stop him from stealing the other half, which reveals their true identities. Apparently, in real life, the NOC agents are spies that have no official government status and are disavowed by their employing government if caught, which means that all IMF agents are NOC agents. A dossier sequence is incorporated into the spell with the narrator saying he's taken liberty of selecting agents from Phelps' usual team and redently telling Phelps what his own usual team members' jobs are. A really awkward bit of, as you know, Bob, exposition. The significant ones are Cruise, Ethan Hunt, the point man as usual, the birds, Clary Phelps, Jim's wife, and the Jim apparently need to be reminded of this by the tape as well, who is in charge of the transport. There is also a Jack as the hacker, Sarah Davis already embedded in an undercover role, a minor female team member named Hannah on the surveillance. Phelps lights a cigarette to cover the smoke from the self destructing tape. So far, aside from a few stylistic touches and the cast changes, this feels like the Mission Impossible we know so far. In Prague, the team meets in a safe house to plan the mission, reminiscent of the survival series. Frequent use of on site command post briefings. Voight's Phelps is a sterner boss than Graves' version, giving curt, fast paced orders with plenty of CIA style operational jargon. If anything, he reminds me more of Dan Briggs. But then Ethan asks an impertinent question, and the tone softens with the group joking around like old friends, though Phelps still seems at a remote from the rest. The banter makes a point of referencing a Chicago hotel where Jim stayed during his absence on the cave mission. In another echo of the bricks, Phelps doesn't participate directly in the mission but monitors from the safe house. Since it's 1996, every team member now has a hidden camera and earwig radio, so Phelps can see everything that's going on. He's also able to override Jack's hacking of the elevator when Jack is too slow, something that I'm sure wouldn't be at all significant later. Ethan goes to the US Embassy in Prague, disguised as a US senator who is basically curious in age makeup, doing an impression of the George Bush. Sir and Sarah helps him get into the secure area so that he can plant his video glasses to get a shot of Gulletson when he arrives shortly thereafter to steal the NSC list from the computer. The plan is to follow the Gulletson to his contact, but something goes wrong. Jack loses the control of the elevator that he is sitting on the roof of and it sends him up to the top of the shaft, which for some reason is equipped with deadly spikes that drop down and impale him. Phelps says he's lost control of the system and come to the rendezvous with the team. But then reports has been tailed. Ethan goes to him while sending Sarah to tally Gullerson. Then Ethan hears shots and arrives in the time to see the bloodied Phelps falling off a bridge into the river. The car that Carrie and Hannah are apparently in blows up, and Ethan finds Sarah and Gullerson's taped, the list gone. The cops come after him, and he rapids. Getting to a phone and inserting a security gadget, he contacts IMF director Henry Credit for help. Credit, who is surprisingly in a Prague already, arranges to meet him at an aquarium themed restaurant. Sigourney is apparently the voice we heard giving Phelps briefing at the beginning. The idea of briefing coming from the IMF director himself never occurred to me. I always figured the voice on the tape or disc was some sport staffer relaying instructions from on high. But it makes sense. If the IMF was originally this small, deniable garage band operations, as I like to think, it wouldn't have much permanent staff. So maybe Job Johnson was playing the actual head of the IMF all those years, or at least someone very senior. Anyway, Cerny gives twitchy, smirmy, unsubtle performances at a Kittredge grills Ethan. And Crew's performance isn't much better, his reaction to the death of all his friends consisting mostly shouting. I need to make something clear here. Although Tom Cruise gets a lot of guff for his personal eccentricities, I think that should be kept separate from his work as an actor. And I have long been very impressed by his total commitment and professionalism in his film work. So don't accept any habit of Cruise bashing in the reviews to follow. However, he's really not that good in this one, which is interesting given that he was nominated for an Oscar for his work in the same year's Jerry Maguire. After previously getting an Oscar nomination for Born on the 4th July and a Golden Globe nomination for A Few Good Men, since Cerny does a pretty bad job too. Maybe the fault lie by Brian De Palma. Ethan recognizes that the restaurant patrons around him were at the party and on the streets in the various brawls before. They are second IMF team. Kittredge reveals that the Glitson mission was a bait to catch a mole inside the IMF with a fake NOC list. And since Ethan's the only survivor from his team, that suggests it's him. Realizing he's in trouble, Ethan palms a chewing gum explosive from his pocket, a final legacy from a jack, and tosses it against an aquarium wall, producing one of the more famous action senses from the film as the glass breaks and all the water pours out, even from the aquarius overhead. One guy is blown clear through the front windows, even though the charge isn't much more the firecracker sized. Ethan breaks into a patent Tom Cruise run to get away. For some reason, he then decides that the best place to hide from his own agency is very safe house his own team leader sets up. Not to worry though, he shattered glass from a light bulb across the hallway so he'll never hear if anyone comes. He remembers Kittredge's exposition about the buyer for the NOC list being an arm dealer named Max, who referred to the deal as Job 314. Hunt attempts a rather implausible Usenet search, and with a term like max and job produce, not a useless overabundance of hits as you would expect. But not hits words over. Then he happens to notice a Bible on the bookshelf and he thinks his job 314. He finds Usenet's forums about the chapter and verse and sends email to the Max, warning that the stolen list is a fake. Later, weary, he has a rather ridiculous dreams of a bloody Phelps accusing him of flair, only to wake up and find it's actually Clary, whom he holds at gunpoint since he can't believe she is alive. The whole scene is a kind of incoherent, a kind of uncomfortable rapey as he forces her onto the bed at gunpoint while she insists it really her. But she remaining him over and over again of their plan to return to the safe house at 4 a.m. 04004 o'clock when the big hands on the floor, 8 bells, etc. is enough to convince him. Later, Ethan gets a hit from a Max and arranges a meeting which involves blindfolding him with a stocking cap that makes him look like the world's most badly assembled mummy. Max turns out to be Vanessa Redgrave. You were expecting maybe Tony Hamilton, who flirts with him shamelessly. He warns her the list is a fake and has a homing device somehow, but the only way to prove it is to let her activate it and then flee just before the Kittredge teams arrive. In order to get the true identity of the mole called Job, Ethan arranges with a Max to steal the actual NOC list. So basically, his plan to clear his name of a crime is to commit the actual crime he is accused of. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Clary agrees to go along to avenge her husband, and they need to recreate hell from the disavowed list. Okay, now I commented back in my review the fortune, and it doesn't make much sense for the IMF to keep a computer record of the agents it disavowed and denied the knowledge of. Isn't that rather counterproductive? Also, wouldn't most disavowed agents be either dead or imprisoned in the foreign countries for their crimes? But the movie, despite using the familiar phrase in the briefing scene, and despite building the whole story around the real life NOC phenomena, there's the closest equivalent to the Mission Impossible style disavowal. Suddenly decides to reinterpret disavowed agents as the ones who is simply gone rogue. It's never really explained through since we cut right to the Ethan and Clary first meeting with the disavowed duo. Ethan's pick was Luther Stickles, a master hacker, while Clary has brought in Franz Krieger, an exfiltration man, gateway chopper pilot. They break into the CIA headquarters illegally. We aim to steal the list, and I'm not sure I need to recap the most famous sequence in the franchise. It's really very clever, a set piece worthy of the best of the Mission Impossible, and drawing the cop Cappy heist, the scene that was the part of inspiration for the entire franchise. They have to break into a vault-like security room with the pressure sensors in the floor, heat sensors, and the audio sensors, and it's very clever that the way they circumvent them as a Krieger lowers Ethan down on a cable from a grill in the ceiling with Luther hacking in from outside and Claire slipping and emitting to the world's lawn staffer so he will be out of the room for a while. Although they're crawling around the through metal air conditioning ducts without making a huge amount of the noise is quite impossible. I love De Palma's use of the silence, something that so few action movies appreciate how to use. I really adds a layer of suspense, no pun intended, to the scene. Anyway, Ethan almost has the data when Keeger is startled by a rat and lets the rope slips, leading to the famous and well-executed moment where the Ethan is stuck just a couple of the inches above the floor and forced to frail around in two dimensions, which must have been difficult for the crews. It highlights the physical skills the crews will use to impressive the effects in this film series. They are almost out scot-free when the Krieger drops his knife into the room, tipping the clerk of his return. The team makes its escape, but the cartridge knows what they have taken. The team goes to London where Ethan and Krieger have a falling out and Krieger leaves. Hunt notices that the Bible he's been drawing verses from his communication with the Max comes from the same hotel where Phelps mentioned staying earlier. As learning that the cartridge has arrested his parents on trumped up drug charges, Ethan calls Cartridge from a public place to comfort him. Make sure to hang up before he can be traced. He's shocked to find Jim Phelps standing next to him. Phelps tells him that the cartridge is the mole. Ethan plays along, but we see his thoughts as he reconstructs what really happened. Phillips himself faked his death and killed the team, though Ethan backs away from the suspicion that Clary helped him kill the others. He also realizes that Kriegner's wife was the one that killed Sarah and Golinsky. He knows why Kriegner would do what he did, and Phillips spins some vague excuse around the Cold War being over and not having a purpose and the president running the country without his permission or something. At this point, it's very clear that this is not the Jim Phelps we knew. This is probably the point where the Greg Morris stormed out of the theater when we saw the film. Hunt arranges to meet the Max on the bullet train to the Paris and makes sure Crittridge gets tickets. He gets the list to the Max, but as Luther nearby jamming her laptop signal so she can transmit it. We don't see him at this point, only hear his voice as he stage manages things and seeing what looked like Jim Phelps assembling a gun. Once Max reveals the thing and seeing what looks like Jim Phelps assembling a gun, once Max reveals the location of the money, Clary goes back to the baggage compartment and confronts Phelps, letting on word she is cahoots with him and telling him that they can get away with the money. Phelps pulls off his face digitally to reveal the disappointment Ethan, but then the Uriel Phil, for the sake of the argument, comes out and holds him at gunpoint. He asks how Ethan figured out that he was the mole, and Ethan tells him about the Bible from the hotel room. Except that makes absolutely no sense. Okay, so the Bible was from the hotel he knew Phelps had stayed at, but he found the Bible in the safe house that Phelps himself had set up. The only thing it proves is a connection between the Phelps and the Phelps' own safe house. Ethan only used that Bible to figure out the job clue and contact Max because it happened to be the copy of the Bible that was on the shelf where he already was when he had the idea. So he had no reason in the world to associate that particular copy of the Bible with the Max herself. The chain of reasoning absolutely does not work. It's an enormous, enormous plot hole that bugged me about his film for years, and no matter how many times I see the film, I just can't see any way to make sense of it. If anything, the person Ethan should have suspected was a Clary. She's the one who brought Krieger abroad. So once Ethan recognized Krieger's knife as a murder weapon, he should have concluded that Clary was the mole and recreated Phelps to help him expose her. He had a legitimate chain of evidence leading her to involvement, something he absolutely did not have for Phelps. Although, granted, he did suspect Clary in his hear what really happened flashbacks earlier, but backed away from the suspicion because he was in love with her. So he could have been blinded Clary to involvement here too, but that still doesn't give him any actual reason to suspect Phil. But Phil's existingly within the movie goes along with the total invalid premise that the Bible somehow proves his guilt, yet reminds Ethan that nobody else has seen he is alive until Ethan puts on his video glasses and sends the signal to the video watch he left for the cartridge thereby. Video proving that Phelps was that mole. It's not all clear what Hunt planned to do next because he just dodges and Phelps randomly shoots Clary by mistakes. And then Phelps escapes through the roof hatch and Ethan follows and finds the curious wins and Krieger shows up in a chopper to pick up Phelps but the Hunt grabs the cable and hooks the chopper to the train so Krieger has to fly it into the channel behind the train. Is that even possible? Somebody calls the Mythbusters. I want to know if it's possible for a helicopter to fly inside a train tunnel. Is there enough air in there to hold it up? Anyway, Phelps jumps onto the runner, and then Ethan jumps onto the other, and he somehow still happens to have a stick of the Jack's plastic gum on him, and he uses it to blow up the chopper, and the force of the blast blows him back onto the train, and somehow he doesn't liquefy his organs in the process, and the chopper blades are right up against his throat when the train abruptly stops. Wait a minute. It stops abruptly. This vehicle, messing thousands of the tons, traveling at 300 mph one moment and is suddenly at a complete stop seconds later. How the hell did that happen? More to the point, why? Even if we stipulate to the fantasy premise that a bullet train could brake as quickly as an automobile, why would they choose to stop the train when a fiery crashing helicopter was coming right at them from behind? I'm sorry, this makes a little sense as the Bible one clue. So, anyway, Kittredge annoyingly turns out not to be bad guy and he arrests Max, who flirts with him too, proving she has no standards. And Ethan and Luther are pardoned, but Ethan doesn't say much point to do work anymore and plans to leave. But he gets an offer of a mission from a flight attendant, just like the films did at the start. And that's when the movie ends with the end title giving us a modernized version of the Chevron theme courtesy of a couple members of the UD. This is very fluid movie. There are parts of it that work. The teaser, main titles, briefing scenes, full authentic, and while the preview capper is a little off and the initial team rather nondescript and lacking in racial diversity, it's fairly well handled, and the Langley set piece is really nifty. The highlight of the film, and the Elfman's music is pretty good and lively action movie score that cores or paraphrases snippets of the plot at the key moment, though never uses the whole melody, continuing the trend established by the John E. Davies in the revival, and occasionally breaks into the big statement of the main title theme. But a lot of the rest doesn't work well, so just plain doesn't make a damn bit of the sense. There are enormous plot holes and impossibilities as I have described. The characters lack depth and clear motivation and don't give us much reason to care about theme. Some directorial touches are interesting but not successful. For instance, there are a couple of the sequences that are shot from Ethan's POV without showing his face. So if it creates suspense about the face he's wearing, but in the first case its face we have already been shown. And in the second it's just his own face. And the actors are directed too broadly like Crews. Ving Rhames seems lesser here than he's been elsewhere, including later in his franchise. Emmanuelle Beard is stunningly lovely and waifish, but just okay as an actress. Joan Wade is actually a pretty good choice as a replacement for the Peter Graves, bearing a certain resemblance in his features and his manner, at least until he is revealed by the baddie. But that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? Jim Phelps a traitor? How do we cope with that? Now, the obvious answer is to say the movie more a reboot, out of the continuity with the series. After all, there are no characters in common beyond Phelps, and this Phelps is unlike the one we knew. More like Dan Briggs, as I said. That's before he goes all smarmy and evil. So maybe we just treat this as a separate reality. After all, it's not like the previous series had any real continuity to speak of, particularly since the revival series ever remade episodes of the original. I have even said before the original series may not all take place in a single reality, but just as a thought exercise. Let's examine the question of whether this can be reconciled with the shows. Could John Phillips have gone regular? Consider the final season of the revival, which I recently completed reviewing. For whatever reason, in the later pattern, Mission Impossible gave away to more conventional spy formula instead of orchestrating master stratagem worked out a dozen movies in advance. Jim was not just sending his team undercover with no clear mission, but to find some information so they could then improvise a way of dealing with it. Could it be that Jim was losing his edge, growing sloppy? Maybe he got some of his team members killed. Statistically speaking, Shannon Reed is the most likely candidate given how routinely she was placed in danger, and it turned him bitter, filled him with doubts about whether he could go on. Maybe that's why he stepped back to the supervising mission remotely rather than participating directly. And maybe he grew disillusioned with the spy game and decided to get out while he could and get rich doing it. But no, no, I really don't think that works. Voight Phelps' mean daring explanation about losing purpose when the Cold War ended didn't really fit, because Jim's IMF team took on many missions that weren't Cold War related, tackling organized crime and international terrorists and the like. Previous Jim Phillips wouldn't have still seen a purpose to his work with or without the Cold War, so I just can't see it happening the way. But of course, the Mission Impossible universe gives us another alternative because it's full of impersonators. White Phelps could be foreign agent who took the real Phelps' place, perhaps using a plastic surgery dodge like Nicholas Black used in the Deadly Harvest. Maybe this happened once Crittridge took over as an IMF detector from the former head, the voice. He didn't know Jim well and is pretty much a lousy director anyway, so he could have been fooled. This creates the unpleasant possibility that the real Jim was murdered, but maybe he escaped the low, or maybe the enemy was holding him captive to get information from him. It's plain to imagine that the mission Ethan Hunt was offered at the time of the film was rescue of the real Jim Phillips. I have just come across a nearly interesting that the opposing view. Still, one way or the other, the story of the Jim Phillips is over now. From here on out, this series is about the adventures of the Ethan Hunt. Although this wasn't a particularly impressive introduction to the Hunt as a character, I can't say much about his personality except that he gets really ticked off when his campmates get killed and he isn't above flirting with his boss wife. I know he gets better later on, but this is not impressive beginning. Frankly, I'm surprised this movie even got a sequel, but it did, so there's more to come. The first production by a high rolling star, Tom Cruise, and his partner and former agent Paula Wagner, Brian De Palma's dour and only fitfully entertaining techno thriller teases one with some of the original show's team espionage spirit, but overall takes itself too seriously. Set mainly in European cities with several strong actors unutilized. If nothing else, Mission Impossible is a laptop computer owner's equivalent of a bullet, in which Steve McQueen fooled his Mustang through the hills of the San Francisco. Secretaries, receptionists, temps, and those who were wearing glasses will have thrilled to see the fondness with which headsets, spectacles, and keyboards are utilized by the characters, caught in the glitchy realm between all-out fantasy of the Bond films and such believable spy dramas as 3 Days of the Condor Mission Impossible is a gadget crazy to the point where some elaborate sequences are all but incomprehensible. A good old fashioned car chase would have hunt. With such heavy hitters as Steven Zillion, David Coip, and Robert Taut fashioning the screenplay, the dreary script and the half-baked characters are the real shockers, combined with the weak casting in the several crucial supporting roles. The revenge and the redemption motivations keep the hero alive as he goes to great lengths to track down a mole or a traitor threatening to shake up the CIA post Cold War operations in the Eastern Europe. From the lackluster opening sequence introducing Ethan Hunt and his co-war team to their very next mission, which ends badly for several members. Mission Impossible starts off the shaky on ground and never quite rights itself. Of the two prominent female characters and the more intriguing one played by the Christian Scott Thomas devours the picture early. Alas, is the romantic backup role French star Emmanuelle Beard plays a character that frequently makes no sense, starting with the fact she's the wife of Ethan's boss. That would be IMF veteran Jim Phillips, that one familiar character name from the TV show, but underplayed glumly by the John Voight. His Phelps is a spook on the loose who dies, comes back in nightmare to extend a bloody hand, a guilt-plagued Ethan, and is otherwise disenchanted with his career. Hence, all furor concerning a pair of the computer files matching code names with the real names of the CIA operator. When Ethan is accused by a company, Honko, of being the mole, he escapes and sets out to find the mysterious Max, who was the seller of one of the pilfered files, providing some desperately needed elegance and humor with her unexpectedly warm performance. Vanessa Redgrave is a super as Max. Another major sporting player who keeps salvage as the Ames latter half is the Ving Rhames, as a hacker who helps Ethan break into the CIA headquarters at Langley, VA. This mid-film sequence, entailing Ethan's hanging at a tether in a supposedly intruder-proof room in one of the most closely guarded buildings in the world, provides a few tense moments and the film's biggest launch at the expert of the puking government type and a bat. The presence of the Jean Reno as an actor hesitantly recreated team members, however, is distracting. The fine actor is no match for the erratic Will Win that is Tom Cruise, whose character has no light to speak beyond his role as a crack IMF point man. Fans of Cruise will not be completely disappointed, but beyond its type of yelling and awkward attempts at the comic relief, the actor is the sputtering fuse in the film and finally explodes for the crowd pleasing climax on a high speed train. Ultimately, the fact that one cares little for the characters makes wading through the techno flucue to root for them an all but impossible task. De Palma uses his usual array of skewed camera angles, and the film is excellently shot in a widescreen by Stephen H. Byrum. But the most charged up moments occur in the transitionals when Lalo Schifrin's great theme music is blasted on the soundtrack in the new orchestrations by a composer Danny Elfman. With the upcoming release of the Mission Impossible Fallout, I decided that I should go back and review the previous movies in the series, except for the Ghost Protocol, since I already reviewed that way back when my blog was total shit. Now it's only the partial shit. So, without further ado, let's jump into the first installment of this franchise. Ladies and gentlemen, Mission Impossible. When he is framed for the deaths of his teammates, IMF agent Ethan Hunt has to go rogue to find out who truly is behind his entire situation. So now we have a spy thriller, and I do think this plot is quite good. What I like most is that it focuses more on the building a suspenseful and whatever unpredictable spy narrative rather than being a typical shooty bang bang summer action movie. It went for a somewhat different approach to its storytelling than its contemporaries. The slowly building sense of the dread and the paranoia is what makes it stand out. That said, the plot isn't flawless. While enjoyable and well told, it can at times feels a little bit convoluted. It's not as insane in that regard as some of the other movies, but it's still worth pointing out. So overall, this plot is good. The characters in this are all layered, linkable, and interesting. Tom Cruise plays an Ethan Hunt, a young, slightly cocky agent who gets put into the ultimate test when he gets blamed for his team's demise. What I like about him there is that he's a very vulnerable hero whose mind likely kinda snaps after that shit that happens to him. And it's interesting to see him get developed throughout the movie. And the Tom Cruise is damn good in the role. Next, I want to mention Ving Rhames as a Luther sequel, a generally tough guy playing the tech dude, and that's amazing. And the Rhames is so much fun in the role. Then we get performance from the people like John Voight, Vanessa Redgrave, Jean Reno, Henry Curtin, Scott Thomas, Emily Beard, Emilio Estevez, and more. All doing very well in this respective role. The reason why I am keeping it vague is because their character are best left experienced rather than explained. The score for the movie was composed by the Danny Elfman and it is pretty fantastic. His score jumps from become bombastic, drowning, emotional, and fun, and it just elevates the movie quite a bit, adding so much to the scenes where it can be heard. And we just take a second to talk about the classic theme. It's just so fucking good, and it's just the epitome of awesome spy action stuff. Based on 1960s TV show, this movie was directed by the Brian De Palma, and I think he did a great job with it. His direction here is incredibly tight and manages to build some absolutely nail biting suspense at time. Just takes the famous war sequence for instance. One of the most suspenseful scenes I have ever wanted. And thanks to De Palma relatively minimalist direction and the action scenes in this are in general very well choreographed and shot. This movie has some of the best uses of the Dutch tales that I have seen, though that could also be because I have seen a whole bunch of films use it as a crutch rather than a tool. Again, De Palma and crew did a great job. This movie has gotten somewhat mixed reviews. One Rotten Tomatoes, it has 62% positive rating, and Metacritic, it has score 59 out of 100. Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, and on IPTM.com, it has score 7 1 out of 10. Impossible Mission Impossible is a suspenseful and highly entertaining spy thriller. It has a really good plot, good characters, and great performances, really good music, and a great directing, as previously mentioned. The plot can be a little bit convoluted at times, but it doesn't ruin it too much for me. This time, for my final score for Mission Impossible is 8.87 out of 10. So, while flipped, it's definitely still worth buying. Alright, well, first thing first, nothing was wrong with the acting. Chris is great, Voight, James, Beard, they all are good. Most of the action and suspense definitely holds up. The ironic legally Voight scene with the Krieger holding up Ethan by a rope and a masterfully directed as it ever's been. Oh, even having this played out many times, I have over the course of my life. Even during movies that are sterilizing or referencing it, it's still an awesome scene. And the climatic train scene, I don't think I have seen it done better before or since. The intensity of how the wind blows back their clothes makes it feel so damn real. Even if you can't tell it's all green screen nowadays. Now this is probably a weird one to remember so well, but I absolutely adored the world. Who has the real NOC list? Scene between Ethan and Krieger, where Ethan is bluffing the shit out of the situation by performing the cheap sleight of hands magic trick. There's just something so charming and a badass with how Ethan handled the situation. However, when all is said and done, this movie is certainly not that good, even a little dumb. Oh man, this is going to be controversial thing to say. Let's get to explaining. Alright, so the big twist of the movie is that Jim didn't die and double twist. Ethan puts together that Jim Krieger and the cleric killed the entire team in the beginning of the movie. But let's really dissect this. The very moment where the pieces start falling into the place for Ethan is when he opens the Bible and it reads it's from the Chicago hotel and the gym wasn't before the movie started. This is a fantastic place to start the because this shows would imply that Jim is dumb shit. Why would we need to steal Bible that he even later on suspected was stamped? Why didn't he check for the stamp before he brought it with him? He came to a conclusion of how Ethan put it all together pretty quickly, as if it was obvious bit of information that he stupidly overlooked. Plus, it's not exactly hard to steal Bibles from anywhere in the world. Just saying. Also, sure, a Chicago Bible in London may not be the most common sight in the world, but now how it's mere extensive a sign that he has the mole the entire time. And don't tell me that it was to use Bible course for all the messages that Job was sending to his buyers or whatever, because Max explicitly says that Job never did that. So not only does Ethan continue to send this message this way just prior to the who has the real NC list scene with the Kager armed with this knowledge, but it makes no sense how this plays James as a job. So at the end of the day, no really has to ask why the hell Jim did the Bible at all. It wasn't for the Bible course because that was all Ethan. This is an extremely contrived excuse to get this plot moving along. During the standoff between the Ethan, Jim, and the Clary in the baggage car of the train, why does Jim kill her? I mean, they are married, and she never betrayed him. She and Ethan never had sex and gave no indication that she was about to betray Jim. Literally, all she was doing trying to prevent Ethan from being killed on the spot. In fact, when you think about it, Clary's idea was the smartest decision. Take the money and let Ethan take the blame. By this point, Kittredge didn't actually know that Jim was alive. Also, kind of stupid to just let Ethan reach for something hidden in these sleeves. These guys are secret agents playing with really fancy toys. Why would anyone risk that? Stakes of the jump are powerful explosives in this world. Who knows what a pair of glasses would do? And my all final problems, which is admittedly a smaller issue, is that the Jim is ultimate bad guy. Why let him? My confusion. Jim Phelps is the main protagonist of the Mission Impossible TV show. Mostly, I think the first season had a protagonist that was a different character, then switched off over to the film later on, becoming the main protagonist of the show despite the fact that the Voight didn't play the TV Jim Phelps. It's implied that this movie takes place in the same universe as the TV show just years later and Ethan Hunt takes the reins as the leading man, so why is he a villain here? Why Jim Phelps always a kind of disgruntled IMF agent? Was he sort of like James Bond in that sense, where he practically hated doing what he did? If so, I guess that could make sense if it was played with better. But the motivation of the Jim Phelps makes very little sense. It's little like he's just doing it for the shares and giggles. Something about the president having his mind. It was a bunch of rambling that would have given Architect from the Matrix Reload a run for his money. The characters in the Mission Impossible are very mediocre. Ethan Hunt is such an unforgettable and a typical protagonist that is, of course, cocky and arrogant. I disliked him, and the rest of the characters are all forgettable. However, I did like the acting and the Tom Cruise in particular pretty good, and this movie started his action career. He's a good fit for the role and is especially good in the action sequences. Speaking of action, it's mostly too over the top and ridiculous in nature. That is why I didn't enjoy it. But I acknowledge its impact of the genre, and I did like the famous scene in the middle, which is influential and, of course, quite ironic by this point. That was suspenseful and intriguing, while the rest is just fast. By today's standards, Mission Impossible is a bit slower than the other entries into the series. It's more of a psychological thriller or a spy noir. Sure, it has amazing action set pieces, setting the bar for the rest of the franchise, which would always be one upping itself with each sequel. But the mystery of who betrayed Ethan is more like a good mystery than an action movie. The central theme of this film is not how far can Ethan jump, how long he hang, or quickly he can run, who can he trust, and it is done in a way that is unique within the franchise. This movie still feels like a small film, not the tentpole series which grew from it. Despite with sort of the slow burning spy thriller Hollywood doesn't make much anymore, it doesn't have some of more memorable sequence of any Mission Impossible movie. Heck, when you think of the Tom Cruise and Impossible Mission, you think of him dangling from a rope into from a ground of a white touch sensitive floor. It also has a truly unique scene where Ethan Hunt is speaking to the Jim Phillips and is trying to put together in his head how the betrayal happens. As he plays out of the scene in his head, the audience is shown all the various versions he is, considering which the film time may seem a little chaotic, but is actually a brilliant way of portraying. The plot is confrontationist delight, a spider's web of stolen computer disk, moles, mayhem, double crosses, and a murder that begins in a Prague with the Cruisen's Ethan Hunt and his impossible mission force, including Beard, Emilio Estevez, and Kristen Scott Thomas. Under the direction of the Jim Phillips, call into the intercept a trailer and a disc containing the identities of every Western spy in Europe. When the mission goes awry and his team is inhibited, Creo suspects he's been set up only to find himself accused of being the mole. As Washington, London, finally the Channel Tunnel all go by in a blur. The rest of the film is taken up by the Cruisin, aided by the beard, all lips and turns out to prove his innocence. There are, of course, gadgets, lyrics, and peeling off various cool excuses and the pieces of the music at regular intervals. De Palma, disrupted master of the piece set, pulls out all the f-stops this time around with edgy camera angles and a series of the extended tension building never jangling sequences, including one in a white veiled world resembling something out of the 2001, where Cruz is suspended on wires above a touch sensitive floor. At a little under 2 hours, this fares up by, but when the script by David Coeb and the Robert Town moves from the action of to plotting and concerns itself with upping the levels of the paranoia, you will be left scratching your head, trying to scrape the twist within the twist within the twist. It all makes the two Tom Cruise ongoing performance as a super spy Ethan Hunt rather surprising. If we ignore the nostalgic many years later squeals like Never Say Never Again or Indian Jones and the Crystal Skull, then we can see that the Harrison Ford played Indiana Jones for the 8 years, and seen Henry played James Bond for 9. Tom Cruise has played Hunt for 22. To start beating that kind of the franchise longevity, you have to start looking at the Japanese franchise like Torasen. Still a world record holder with 48 films in 26 years, all starring Kiyoshi Atsumi. It's actually quite a shock to rewatch Mission Impossible after a break of some years. Tom Cruise seems so young. In Mission Impossible IMF agents, Ethan Hunt goes run when an unknown conspirator murders his entire espionage team. To uncover the mole, he assembles his own group of dissolved agents to steal a list of the secret agent identities from the CIA headquarters in Virginia. In retrospect, this is a slightly odd movie. Not a huge amount happens. There are three set pieces: the initial mission, the infiltration of the CIA's secure data room, and a climax on a high speed train. There's honestly not a huge amount of plot in between, given the film a slightly spare, unpopulated feel. The opening mission and its ensuing massacre are very clearly staged. Horn's team is very quickly set up and established with a distinctive and likely personalities. It's also very clearly cast. The presence of the Kristen Scott Thomas and the Emilio Estevez leads one to assume their characters are going to be around for a while. So when they are both abruptly murdered, it does come as a big surprise. Tom Cruise does a good job of expressing the Hearn's rising panic as one colleague after one dies in front of him, with him incapable of stopping it. Once Hunt is framed for the betrayal of the team, he goes rogue with a fellow survivor Claire in an attempt to flesh out the real traitor and prove his own innocence. This is, of course, an adaptation of a very popular 1960s television series. When the film came out, the series fans had two major criticisms. The first regarded the identity of the film's villain, where I wouldn't go into here. Suffice to say, I don't have a problem with the plot development but acknowledge those closer to material which easily feel differently. The second regards the idea that the film has transformed as an able team-based franchise into the hero-based single-actor franchise. While it's easy to see how some fans read the conclusion, it's a Tom Cruise film, he's only one of the poster and the film dedicates the majority of its time to his career. It's also not really accurate. Hunt is a part of one team in the film's first act, and within the minutes of losing them, he is quite assembling another. There are a shift in a narrative focus to the film, but this certainly hasn't.